Grace's wedding day became her worst nightmare when the man she loved rejected her 30 minutes before the ceremony because she couldn't walk. Rejected, worthless, destroyed. But then a shadow fell across her wheelchair in that chapel garden. A Mafia boss who would do something so unthinkable, so dangerous, that it would forge them both in fire. This is what happened next. Rafinha Haid had heard that sound before. It was the kind of crying that came from somewhere deeper than grief, raw, desperate, the sound of a soul being discarded like trash. He'd heard it once from his own reflection 3 years ago, the night his wife walked out because their daughter's epilepsy was too much to handle. He'd sworn then that he'd never let anyone make him feel worthless again. Yet here he was, standing in a chapel garden he had no business being in, listening to that same sound tear through the spring air. "Papa, stop," Luna whispered, pulling at his hand. His daughter had insisted they take a shortcut through the church grounds after her doctor's appointment. Rafinha had learned not to argue with Luna's instincts. The child saw things he didn't. Kindness in a world that had shown them precious little of it. The woman in the wheelchair didn't notice them at first. She was drowning in white lace and shattered dreams, her natural hair styled in elaborate curls that were coming undone, flowers wilting in the humidity. Mascara carved dark rivers down her brown cheeks. At her feet, white roses lay scattered like casualties of war. Rafinha had built an empire on reading people. He could spot a liar at 50 paces, smell fear before it even registered on a man's face. But this woman wasn't hiding anything. Her pain was absolute, displayed with the kind of vulnerability that would get you killed in his world. "Papa," Luna said again, louder now, "the princess is sad." The woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide with the startled awareness of someone who'd forgotten the world still existed beyond her suffering. For a moment, Rafinha saw himself reflected in those eyes, the particular devastation that came from being abandoned because you were complicated. He should keep walking. He had a meeting with his lieutenants in an hour. The shipment from Bogota needed his personal attention. His world was one of blood and business, and this woman in her wedding dress was neither. But Luna was already moving forward, her small hand clutching her stuffed rabbit as she approached the wheelchair with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Why are you crying?" Luna asked, tilting her head. "Did someone hurt you?" The woman tried to speak, but only managed a broken sob. Rafinha watched her hands tremble as she attempted to wipe her face, the massive engagement ring on her finger catching the light. Past tense, he corrected himself. That ring meant nothing now. "Luna, come here," he said quietly, but her daughter ignored him, as she often did when she decided something was important. "You're too pretty to cry," Luna declared with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old. "Tell her, Papa. Tell her she's a princess." Rafinha looked at the broken bride, at the chapel behind her where some coward had just destroyed her and made a decision that would change everything.
Grace had finally managed to speak, her voice hoarse and shattered when Rafinha saw him, a man in a gray suit hurrying across the parking lot toward a silver Mercedes, his phone pressed to his ear, laughing, actually laughing. "That's him," Grace whispered, following Rafinha's gaze. "That's Grant." Something cold and ancient settled in Rafinha's chest. He'd killed men for less than this. Hell, he'd killed men for looking at him wrong on a Tuesday. But this, abandoning a woman 30 minutes before her wedding, leaving her weeping in a garden while he chatted on his phone like he'd just dodged an inconvenient meeting, this was a special kind of cowardice. "Luna, stay with the princess," Rafinha said quietly, already moving. "Papa," Luna started, but she knew that tone. She clutched her rabbit tighter and took Grace's trembling hand in hers. Rafinha crossed the parking lot with the measured pace of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Grant was still on the phone, still laughing, fumbling with his keys, when a tattooed hand slammed against the Mercedes inches from his head. "Going somewhere?" Rafinha asked, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded violence. Grant spun around, his face draining of color as he took in the 6'2" wall of muscle and ink blocking his escape. Who the hell are you?" "Wrong question." Rafinha leaned in closer, letting Grant see the cold fury in his eyes.
The right question is, what kind of man leaves his bride crying in a wheelchair because she's not perfect enough for him? This is none of your business. Raffinia's hand shot out, gripping Grant's collar and slamming him against the car with controlled precision. No witnesses, no cameras in this corner of the lot. He'd checked automatically, the way most people checked for traffic. I'm making it my business, Raffinia said softly. That woman in there, she deserves better than you. She deserves someone who sees her strength, not her chair. But you're too much of a coward to be that man. Grant's phone clattered to the pavement. You're insane. I'll call the police. Go ahead, Raffinia smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Tell them how Raffinia Jude made you wet yourself in a church parking lot. I'm sure that'll play well at your next country club meeting. Recognition flickered in Grant's eyes, followed by pure terror. Everyone in this city knew that name, knew what it meant. The Jude family didn't just control territory. They owned the police commissioner, 3 judges, and enough political capital to make problems disappear permanently. Please, I didn't know. I wouldn't have... You're going to leave her alone, Raffinia continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You're going to tell everyone who asks that you weren't good enough for her, and if I ever hear you've contacted her, looked at her, or even thought about her too hard, I'll show you what monsters really do to cowards. He released Grant, watching the man stumble toward his car, hands shaking too badly to get the key in the door. It took 3 tries before the engine started, and Grant was gone before Raffinia had even turned around. When he walked back to the garden, Luna was singing softly to Grace, and the broken bride was watching him with eyes that held a question she was afraid to ask. Grace watched the tattooed stranger return from the parking lot, his knuckles unmarked, but his eyes carrying the weight of whatever he'd just done. She should be afraid. Every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous, that the casual violence radiating from him should send her wheeling in the opposite direction. But Luna was still holding her hand, humming a song Grace didn't recognize, and somehow that small gesture anchored her to the moment. "What did you do?" Grace asked as Raffinia crouched down beside them, his expensive suit pulling tight across his shoulders. "Gave him some perspective," Raffinia said simply. He studied her face, reading the exhaustion there, the particular emptiness that came after tears had run dry. "He won't bother you again." "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. Then something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor. "I know what it's like to be left because you come with complications." Luna stopped humming. Grace felt the little girl's hand tighten around hers. "My wife walked out 3 years ago," Raffinia said, his gaze distant. Luna was 2. We'd just gotten the epilepsy diagnosis, and suddenly the woman who promised to love me through anything decided that watching our daughter have seizures was too much responsibility for her designer lifestyle. Grace's breath caught. She looked at Luna, at this precious child who was smiling at her like she was the most important person in the world, and felt something crack inside her chest. "She left you both?" Grace whispered. "Packed her bags while I was at the hospital with Luna after a particularly bad episode." Raffinia's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the ink on his neck. Left a note on the kitchen counter, said she couldn't handle the burden of a sick child, didn't even say goodbye to her own daughter. Luna tugged on her father's sleeve. "But we're okay, Papa. We don't need her." "No, we don't, Piccola." Raffinia pressed a kiss to his daughter's curly hair, and Grace saw the fierceness of his love in that simple gesture, the kind of devotion that would burn the world down to keep this child safe. "So when I heard you crying," Raffinia said, "when I saw that ring on your finger and that empty chapel behind you, I knew exactly what had happened. Some coward decided you were broken, that your wheelchair made you less than what he deserved." "I am broken," Grace said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I can't walk. I can't—" "You survived." Raffinia's voice cut through her spiral with surgical precision. "You're sitting here in a wedding dress after the worst day of your life, and you're still breathing. That's not broken, Grace. That's steel wrapped in lace." Grace stared at this man, this dangerous man who somehow saw past her wheelchair to something she'd forgotten existed. "How do you know my name?" Grace asked quietly. Raffinia's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "It's embroidered on your veil."
Papa, you have to sit down, Luna announced with the absolute authority only a 5-year-old could wield. She tugged on Rafinia's hand, then pointed at the grass beside Grace's wheelchair. Princesses don't like when people stand over them. It's rude. Rafinia raised an eyebrow. Luna, we should let Grace... Her name is Princess Grace, Luna corrected firmly. She turned to Grace with complete seriousness. You are a princess, right? You have the dress and the flowers and everything? Grace felt a laugh bubble up through her chest, foreign and unexpected. It came out broken, half-sob, but it was there nonetheless. I suppose I do have the dress. See? Luna looked at her father triumphantly. Sit, Papa. For a moment, Grace saw the internal war play out on Rafinia's face. This was a man who commanded rooms, who made grown men tremble with a look, who probably hadn't sat on the ground since he was a child himself. His perfectly tailored suit cost more than her cancelled honeymoon. His world was one of leather chairs and marble floors and power that bent the city to his will. But his daughter was looking at him with those wide, hopeful eyes, and Grace watched something in him surrender. Rafinia Jude, feared Mafia boss and king of the criminal underworld, lowered himself onto the grass beside her wheelchair. He adjusted his position with careful dignity, his back straight despite the informal setting, his tattoos stark against the green lawn. Happy? He asked Luna dryly. Not yet. Luna climbed into Grace's lap without asking permission, settling herself against Grace's wedding gown like it was the most natural thing in the world. Now Princess Grace needs to tell us what kind of kingdom she wants. Grace's arms came up automatically to steady the child, and for the first time since Grant's rejection, she felt something other than devastation. Luna was warm and solid and real, her curls tickling Grace's chin, her stuffed rabbit pressed between them. I don't understand, Grace said softly. Every princess needs a kingdom, Luna explained patiently, as if Grace was being deliberately dense. A place where people are nice and nobody makes you cry. Right, Papa? Rafinia was watching his daughter with an expression Grace couldn't quite read, pride mixed with something that looked almost like grief. Right, Piccola. So what do you want in your kingdom? Luna pressed, turning in Grace's lap to look up at her. Flowers, horses, a castle? Grace looked down at this fearless child, then at the man sitting on the grass in his $1,000 suit, and felt something shift inside her. They were strangers. They had stumbled into her worst moment by accident. By all logic, they should walk away and leave her to piece herself back together alone. But Luna was drawing invisible designs in the air, describing a kingdom where wheelchairs had wings and gardens grew chocolate. And Rafinia was listening with the solemn attention he probably gave to business negotiations worth millions. And Grace, despite everything, felt the smallest spark of something that might someday become hope. Can we have a library? Grace asked quietly. In this kingdom? Luna's face lit up like sunrise. The biggest library in the whole world.
Grace woke up in a bedroom that looked like it belonged in an Italian villa, not her cramped studio apartment. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she'd gotten here. Then it all came flooding back. The chapel garden, Luna's insistence that she needed protecting, and Rafinia's quiet declaration that no one should spend their wedding night alone in a place filled with memories of betrayal. That had been 3 days ago. You're awake. Rafinia appeared in the doorway holding a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. He'd traded his suit for dark jeans and a black Henley that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. Dr. Reeves is here for your session. My what? Grace pushed herself up against the pillows, acutely aware that she was wearing pajamas she didn't remember changing into. Someone had hung her wedding dress in the corner, cleaned, pressed, a ghost of what should have been. Physical therapy. Rafinia set the coffee on her nightstand, which she now noticed was positioned at the perfect height for her wheelchair. Everything in this room was, she realized. The bathroom had been retrofitted with grab bars and a roll-in shower. The closet rods were lowered. Dr. Reeves is the best in the city. He works with Olympic athletes. I can't afford... You're under my protection now, Rafinia said, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. That means you get the best of everything. Physical therapy, medical care, whatever you need. Grace stared at him. Why are you doing this? Because Luna would never forgive me if I didn't. He moved to the window, looking out over grounds that seemed to stretch forever. And because I don't leave people to suffer when I can do something about it. The physical therapy sessions were brutal. Dr. Reeves was kind, but relentless, pushing Grace through exercises that left her trembling and sweating. But for the first time since her accident, she felt like someone believed she could be stronger. The estate itself was a revelation. Rafinia's home was a fortress disguised as elegance. High walls, armed guards who nodded respectfully as she wheeled past, technology that probably cost more than her entire life savings. But inside, Luna had turned it into something softer. There were finger paintings on the refrigerator, stuffed animals colonizing the library, and a garden where the little girl insisted on having tea parties every afternoon. "You'll join us, won't you?" Luna asked on the fourth day, appearing at her door with a tiara that looked suspiciously real. "Papa says you need sunshine." Grace found herself at a child-sized table in the garden, a Mafia boss pouring imaginary tea into plastic cups while his daughter explained the complex social hierarchy of her stuffed animal kingdom. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, but here, in this bubble, there was only the three of them and the impossible gentleness of the moment. "More tea, Princess Grace?" Luna asked solemnly. Grace looked at Rafinia, who was holding a tiny teacup in his scarred, tattooed hands with perfect seriousness, and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. "Yes, please," she whispered, and meant something else entirely. Grace was in the library when the guard knocked, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant trouble. "Miss Grace, there's someone at the gate." He paused, uncomfortable. "He says he's your fiancé?" The book in her lap might as well have turned to stone. "Ex-fiancé," she corrected, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell him to leave." "He's insisting, says he needs to apologize, that he made a mistake." The guard shifted his weight. "Mr. Jude is in a meeting, but I can—" "Let him in." Both Grace and the guard turned to find Rafinia standing in the doorway, his presence filling the space like gathering storm clouds. He'd been in back-to-back calls with his associates all morning, but now his full attention was focused on Grace, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sir, are you sure?" the guard began. "Bring him to the east parlor." Rafinia's eyes never left Grace's face. "I want to hear what he has to say." 20 minutes later, Grant stood in the ornate parlor looking exactly as Grace remembered, handsome, polished, and suddenly very small in the shadow of Rafinia's estate. His eyes widened when he saw her, taking in the designer clothes she now wore, the subtle makeup, the way she held herself differently in this space. "Grace, thank God!" Grant moved toward her, but stopped when Rafinia materialized at her side. "I've been trying to reach you. Your phone's disconnected. Your apartment's empty." "What do you want, Grant?" She was surprised by the coldness in her own voice. "I made a mistake." He glanced nervously at Rafinia, then back to her. "I panicked. Wedding jitters, you know. But I've had time to think and—" "And what? You've decided I'm not too much of a burden, after all?" The words tasted like acid. "It's not like that." Grant's polished veneer was cracking. "I love you. We can make this work. We can go back to how things were." "How things were?" Rafinia repeated softly, dangerously. "You mean when you made her feel like her wheelchair was something to apologize for? When you left her crying in a chapel garden like discarded trash?" Grant's face flushed. "This is between me and Grace." "No." Rafinia moved closer, and Grace saw Grant instinctively step back. "This is about you realizing that Grace has moved on to better things, and you can't stand that she's not broken anymore. You don't want her back because you love her. You want her back because your guilt is eating you alive." "Grace, please," Grant turned to her desperately. "Tell him this is crazy. Tell him you'll come home." Grace looked at Grant, really looked at him, and saw what Rafinia had seen from the beginning. A coward. A man who loved the idea of being noble more than he loved her. Who would have spent their marriage making her feel grateful for his tolerance. "He wanted a normal wife," Rafinia said quietly, his hand coming to rest on Grace's shoulder. He wanted someone who wouldn't complicate his perfect life. He wanted the wrong things, Grace, and you deserve someone who wants exactly who you are. Grace reached up and covered Rafinia's fan with her own. Goodbye, Grant. The gunfire started at 2 a.m. Grace jerked awake to the sound of shattering glass and shouting. Her door burst open and one of Rafinia's guards appeared, weapon drawn. Stay down, Miss Grace. We're under attack. Where's Luna? Grace was already reaching for her wheelchair, her heart hammering against her ribs. Mr. Jude has her in the safe room, but Grace was already moving, wheeling herself into the hallway with the speed born of pure terror. More gunfire echoed through the estate. She could hear Rafinia's voice barking orders, the controlled chaos of his men responding to the threat. She found Luna in the safe room, a reinforced panic room behind Rafinia's office, but something was wrong. The little girl was on the floor, her small body jerking violently, foam at the corners of her mouth. A seizure. No, no, no! Rafinia was on his knees beside his daughter, his hands shaking, the first time Grace had ever seen him lose his composure. Blood stained his shirt from a graze across his shoulder, but he didn't seem to notice. Luna, Piccola, please. Move. Grace's voice cut through his panic with the authority of someone who'd spent years in veterinary emergency rooms. She dropped from her chair to the floor beside Luna, her hands immediately checking the child's airway. How long has she been seizing? 2 minutes? Maybe 3? Rafinia's voice cracked. Her medication, I don't know where. Doesn't matter right now. We need to keep her safe. Grace's training took over, her own fear transforming into focused precision. She rolled Luna onto her side, supporting the child's head, tracking the seconds. Time me. Tell me when we hit 5 minutes. Another explosion rocked the estate. Rafinia's phone was buzzing incessantly, his men needing orders, but he stayed frozen beside Grace, watching her hands move with practiced certainty over his daughter. Talk to her. She can hear you even if she can't respond. Tell her she's safe. Rafinia's tattooed hand covered Luna's small one. You're okay, baby. Papa's here. Princess Grace is here. You're going to be fine. Grace monitored Luna's breathing, her seizure patterns, the subtle signs that spoke of neurological storms subsiding. The skills were the same whether the patient was a seizing dog or a child. Airway, breathing, safety, patience. 4 minutes, Rafinia said hoarsely. Almost there. Grace kept her voice calm, steady. Luna, you're doing so well, sweetheart. Just a little longer. At 4 minutes and 40 seconds, the seizure stopped. Luna's body went limp, her breathing evening out into the deep exhaustion that followed. Grace stayed close, monitoring, until those brown eyes fluttered open, confused and scared. Papa? Luna whispered. I'm here, Piccola. Rafinia pulled his daughter into his arms, and Grace saw tears streaming down his face. This dangerous man utterly unmade by his child's suffering. Luna's gaze found Grace. Princess Grace saved me? Yes, Rafinia said, looking at Grace with something that transcended gratitude. Yes, she did. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Inside, everything had changed. Grace found Rafinia on the terrace 3 nights after the attack, staring out at the city lights that sprawled beneath his fortress. The estate had been repaired, the threat eliminated with the brutal efficiency she'd come to expect from his world. But something had shifted between them, unspoken and heavy as gravity. You should be resting, he said without turning around. Somehow he always knew when she was near. So should you. Grace wheeled closer, noting the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion he wouldn't let his men see. Luna's asking for you. She wants her bedtime story. I'll go in a moment. He turned finally, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. I need to tell you something first. Grace's heart began to pound. Okay. That day in the chapel garden, Rafinia began, his voice rough. I told you Luna insisted we take that shortcut, that we stumbled upon you by accident. Yes. That wasn't entirely true. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the dim light. I heard you crying from the parking lot. I heard that sound, the one I recognized, and I could have kept walking, should have kept walking. I had a meeting, responsibilities, a dozen reasons to stay out of it. Grace gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Why didn't you? Because something in me wouldn't let me abandon you the way I was abandoned, the way you were abandoned. He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level the way he had that first day. But it was more than that, Grace. When I saw you in that wedding dress, broken but still fighting to breathe, still holding yourself together, I saw strength I'd only seen in mirrors after my darkest moments. Rafinia, let me finish. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I brought you here under the guise of protection, told myself I was being noble, that I was just helping someone who needed it. But the truth is, I've been falling in love with you since that first moment. With your courage, your kindness to my daughter, the way you handle every challenge like it's a battle you're determined to win. Grace felt tears burning behind her eyes. I'm scared. Your world is dangerous. I'm not... You survived the unthinkable and came out steel, Rafinia interrupted fiercely. You belong in my world, Grace, not as someone I'm protecting, but as my equal, my queen. Grace's hands came up to frame his face, tracing the tattoos on his neck, the scars he'd earned building his empire. Then crown me, she breathed. And when his lips met hers, it felt like coming home to a kingdom she'd been searching for her entire life.
The Starlight Chapel looked nothing like the venue where Grace's world had ended 6 months ago. Rafinia had chosen it deliberately, a smaller, intimate space with soaring windows that let in the evening light, transforming everything it touched into gold. Grace sat in the bride's room, her reflection staring back at her from the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd been abandoned in a garden. This Grace wore a gown of champagne silk that draped elegantly over her chair, her natural hair crowned with a delicate circlet of diamonds that Rafinia had presented her with last night. Real diamonds, he'd assured her with that slight smile, because his queen deserved nothing less. "You look beautiful," Luna announced, appearing in the doorway in her flower girl dress. She'd insisted on pale yellow to match the roses. "Papa's going to cry." "Your father doesn't cry, sweetheart." "He did when you said yes." Luna climbed into Grace's lap carefully, mindful of the dress. "He told me you were the best thing that ever happened to us, better even than chocolate." Grace laughed, pressing a kiss to the child's curls. In 6 months, Luna had become hers in every way that mattered. The seizures were better controlled now, and Grace had learned every warning sign, every comfort the little girl needed. They were a team, a family. "Are you ready?" Dr. Reeves appeared, offering his arm. He'd become more than her physical therapist over these months. He'd become a friend. "Your groom is getting impatient." The chapel doors opened, and Grace's breath caught. Rafinia stood at the altar in a black suit that looked like sin and salvation combined, his tattoos visible at his collar and wrists, a visual reminder of exactly who he was. His men lined the pews, dangerous and loyal, alongside the handful of people Grace had invited from her old life. 2 worlds colliding, united by the woman wheeling herself down the aisle. Grace didn't need anyone to give her away this time. She propelled herself forward with steady, strong arms, past the faces that watched with genuine joy, past the roses that Luna scattered in her path. When she reached Rafinia, his hand extended to her, and she saw what Luna had promised, tears glistening in his dark eyes. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back, his voice rough with emotion. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment, but Grace barely heard them. She was lost in Rafinia's gaze, in the certainty of this moment. When it came time for vows, he knelt before her chair without prompting, bringing himself to her one final time. "Grace," he began, his voice carrying through the chapel, "you taught me strength isn't about what you can walk away from, but what you choose to stay and fight for. You are my queen, my equal, my home. I vow to protect you, to challenge you, to love you exactly as you are for as long as I breathe. Grace took his scarred hands in hers. Rafinha, you saw me when I couldn't see myself. You gave me a kingdom when I thought I'd lost everything. I vow to stand beside you, to love Luna as my own, to be the steel you need when the world gets heavy. You are my unexpected ending and my perfect beginning. When they kissed, Luna cheered loudly from the front row, and even the hardened criminals in attendance smiled. Grace was no longer the poor bride rejected for her chair. She was the queen of an empire, the wife of the city's most powerful man, and the woman who'd survived the unthinkable to claim the love she deserved.
The reception lasted until dawn, filled with laughter, music, and the kind of joy that comes from surviving darkness to find light. As Grace and Rafinha shared their first dance, him standing, her in her chair, moving together in perfect synchronization, Luna declared it the most beautiful thing ever. And perhaps it was, because this story was never really about a wheelchair or a mafia boss or even a wedding. It was about a woman who discovered that being broken and being unlovable are not the same thing. That sometimes the most dangerous people can see our worth when the safe ones are too cowardly to look. That real love doesn't ask us to be less complicated. It demands we show up exactly as we are, scars and all. Grace learned that rejection, as devastating as it feels, is sometimes protection in disguise. That the person who walks away wasn't meant to stay. And that the right love doesn't just accept your complications, it cherishes them as part of what makes you extraordinary. Rafinha found something he'd stopped believing in, a partner who saw past his violence to the fierce protector beneath, who loved his daughter as her own, who understood that strength comes in many forms. Together, they built a kingdom where wheelchairs didn't define worth, where past wounds became battle scars to be proud of, and where a beggar bride became a queen. The moral? Your value isn't determined by who couldn't see it. The right person won't just tolerate your truth. They'll fight wars to protect it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe for more stories about finding love in unexpected places and discovering strength you never knew you had. Drop a comment below telling me what moment in Grace and Rafinha's story resonated with you most. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button and join our community.